Hi, I'm Seamless, and today it's time for another How to Synth tutorial. And today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. So this is actually based on a sound that I did during a lesson with someone who gave me various kinds of like trappy lead things to do. And they weren't like a typical kind of like actual lead kind of thing. They were more like a big mess of sound. So I was like, and most of them, when I heard them, when he was like, how do I do this? It was clear that a lot of them were done with Serum. Like it was done with Serum's specific kind of filters that it's got. I mean, you could do it with LFL Tool 2, I guess. But a lot of that sound design started becoming super mainstream around when Serum came out. So I'm not going to assume that it was made with Serum. But I figured it had to be a way to do something like that with Harmor. And to a certain extent there is. But they just basically just created this sound. This is a slight variation on what this is, like just because I've done a couple of things differently from what I did in the lesson, but it's still more or less the idea. So basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to make a kind of a pitchy like mess of a thing. So obviously I decided I was going to use Prism. There's a lot of automation going on in here at the envelope level that's happening whenever a note's triggered. For example, in here, we have this coming up in the Prism amount here. You can see in this graph that like there's this kind of up and down bit going on, and that's because the center of the knob is actually off, and there's positive and negative, positive, negative. And so that means this graph goes positive whatever the value is, and then the opposite of whatever the value is. So if the knob was down here, up here, this range would actually be this side of the knob, and then down here would be the opposite side of the knob. That's how the positive negative polarity graphs work. There's a bit of unison on. The unison also has a bit of articulation, and the unison is also kind of crazy looking. Along with the Prism. The Prism shape is quite special. And all of that vocal kind of quality we're getting is actually coming from the lower end here. That kind of stuff is coming from that, and also like a little bit of these guys going on here. But like it's not the usual Prism shape, which is just a big wave on everything. It's actually like somewhat calculated to create a sound that I kind of want. I've also got the phaser on with also a custom shape. It's not moving though, but it is keyboard tracking, which means that it's kind of where it is, where I want it to be, and then it'll also move around with the notes, so the profile's still the same. Basically, just creating lots of change to the sound. I guess I kept it to the same note. Normally, I would do this, but that ended up working fine. Just two voices in unison, mostly there to create stereo, but in the effects, I have is distorting it. The mix fader, what this does is that in the middle, it's all distortion, and then you have a mix of distortion and dry, and then up here is all the way dry, I think. I actually think right here might be all the way dry. Up here is all the way distortion of a particular polarity, because the positive and negative aspects of the fader mean that you can do things like have a negative phase of just the distortion, which is actually pretty interesting applications you can do this with, none of which I used here, but what you can do is actually a trick that someone on the EDM production subreddit IRC forum chat told me about one time, where you take the original signal of the sound that you made and the distorted signal of the sound that you made, you phase cancel them, and then you get just the distortion. And when you have just the distortion, you can play that against the clean version of the sound, because it turns out when you have a distorted signal, it's made up of the original signal and like the resulting distortion, and like it's not like, you know, it's not like we're adding into that it's obviously distorting the signal, but because of that, if we have only the distortion as a result of phase cancellation and only the clean from like just the original part of it, you add them together, it sounds like a distorted signal. And the beauty of this is that you are then able to control the distortion independently from the original signal, so like you could EQ only the mids of the distortion but keep the mids of the original signal. How cool is that? It's a neat idea. Something I don't really do very often, because it sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it? Anyway, I have delay on, very high, well, reasonably high feedback levels, really high input levels, but it's tiny time amounts. This gets us a kind of a metallic sound going on. That's kind of what that does. Reverb, just there to be reverb. I have the pre-effects volume all the way up. Now what this does is that there's a bunch of knobs here, rather faders. There's a pre and post effects volume. And this is great because it means that it's shoving the synthesis into the effects really, really loud. And for things, when you have compression on, this is kind of handy, because if I want to have like reverb and delay and whatever, it gets pushed into there really loudly, and then the compression deals with it harder. And so we get a nice kind of like fluidy, I'm not going to try to explain it to you in terms of the sound. It's buzzwords. I don't want to use buzzwords. It compresses it harder and it sounds better to me. Yeah. So there's actually also a volume envelope going on. So there's kind of two ways I usually do this. Like this is sort of where it ended up as, but you could also do one of these. Like it's also worth pointing out that in the advanced tab, I have ramping all the way off, which when we're kind of making our own ramp there with a volume envelope. But I also have kill all monophonic mode. So because this thing will just keep going. I didn't turn on sustain loop end here, so it'll always be that long. But if I trigger a note before it ends, it'll actually redo the envelope. Versus if I had this off, you would hear the other note still there. Alternatively, if I did this, it would actually stop playing when you let go of the note as opposed to going through with the note. Depends on what you want. I was like, okay with it like that. I was okay with it like that beforehand, so it wasn't a big deal. But there's also this. Kind of up to you to determine kind of, I guess, what you want in terms of how hard you want it to hit. It's worth noting that this particular profile, if you ever hear those like really snappy like trance chords, for example, that like open up as supersaws, that kind of thing, but they have like this incredible attack going on, this is what this looks like. This is what the transients will look like, where there'll be a big stab and it'll come down to its actual level and then it'll go down slower. This is what a typical like snappy pluck looks like. So like this amount, there's usually a compressor on there that's keeping it here, but then you have some amount of attack engaged, which allows some of the original signal at its original level to come through. This is what sort of the attack functions on regular compressors are for. And then when you do that, it makes the original hit still there, still very loud, and it's nice and snappy. You can even compress the signal again afterwards and keep it so that like this like it'll do kind of like one of these where it'll bring the peak down, but it'll keep it below the level. And this will actually still sound pretty snappy, even though like factually the level is still the same. It's kind of, it's a little bit interesting how that works out in terms of compressors, but. Worth pointing that out because we are compressing it again with quite a big limit. The burning mode actually does a little bit of extra saturation on it too, so it's kind of nice. Plus distortion. This was originally designed to be a lead, but like I keep playing and I like bass notes better. But it's a how to synth. It's not necessarily a bass. What else is important in the sound? Phaser's doing his thing. It's in the harmonic mode. It's important that it's in the harmonic mode because we're doing all this pitch motion. The harmonic mode of the phaser keys into the phaser's position and what harmonics it decides to turn on and off based on pitch motion. So there's a lot of that going on with the Prism, but also with the unison index mapping, which is what this is. If you're familiar with this whole process, regular unison in a normal like plugin will copy the whole thing and you'll be able to change its pitch or phase or whatever depending on whatever parameters they give you. But it changes the whole thing all at once, the whole complex tone, which for like a super saw, for example, means that you're taking one whole saw wave and changing its pitch up, which means that all the harmonics are being changed up individually. But like in a non-additive world, that's all you can do. In an additive world, everything is controlled by individual harmonics. So that when we make copies of it, we're making copies of the whole set of however many harmonics are being played at a time, which means that this window is available here because what it allows us to do is it allows us to change by how much pitch it gets moved on an individual harmonic basis. So instead of moving everything all together by one semitone, we can move the bunch of different ones different ways, which gets us really different interactions because we're used to typical regular Reese motion, but not like what happens when interharmonic phase cancellation happens at a rate that's independent of other harmonics. And this is a huge mess that I made because I wanted to make a huge mess sound. So that's how that works out. The Prism, as far as how I arrived at this sort of shape, it was mostly trial and error. There's some inference I could make about like how I knew certain sounds would do certain things, but like I didn't actually mean to even get to this position with this kind of sound. So it's trial and error as far as the eye can see. Yeah. Monophonic kill all mode and then ramp all the way off. Ramping all the way off is actually pretty important if you want to do the snappy version, because like with it on, that's kind of a big deal. Some versions of this I'll have phase randomness on, but I don't know. Yeah, kind of a neat sound. I'll put up this patch here to download in the description of this video. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.